Welcome to Rooting for You, a seasonal gardening podcast for non-experts. I'm Tess, and I know nothing.
And I'm Alyce, and I know some things.
Each week we'll chat about one gardening topic and then discuss the effort-reward payoff by asking, is the juice worth the squeeze? Just a heads up, there might be a bit of swearing in this episode. You've been warned. Welcome to Rooting for You, still in lockdown in Melbourne, still recording remotely. So please don't mind the slightly less than quality sound recording. I'll tell you what, I am absolutely loving seeing everyone's spring gardens and all of the lockdown gardening activities on Instagram. It's so fantastic. We do love all the Instagram messages, but also if you do like what we're doing and you would like to show us a little bit of love, you can jump on your podcast app and rate and review on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on Spotify. It'll help us keep growing, pun intended, our little Rooting from You community. Now, on with the show. Today we are talking about strawberries. Sweet, plump, juicy, sometimes with a little bit of a tang, strawberries. Talk about a crowd pleaser. One thing I always hear about strawberries is how much better they taste when you grow your own. So let's do it.
I think this is such a fitting episode for today because I was out in the garden on the weekend, using all my lockdown hours to get some garden tasks done. And my strawberry plants have just bursted into flower literally in the last couple of days. And strawberry flowers mean strawberry fruit. So I shouldn't be too far away from having some delicious plump goodness myself.
Ooh.
They do produce really quickly, even in cold climates. They're actually going to be one of the first things I'll be harvesting this spring. And I do agree with you, Tess. There is absolutely nothing better than a homegrown strawberry. They taste so intensely flavoured that it almost tastes like a lolly. Like it's just like a strawberry on steroids. None of this watery, fibrous situation we sometimes have going on from the supermarket. Often when I talk about why I want to grow something, I'm crapping on about the different varieties you can't buy. When it comes to strawberries, I actually couldn't care less about the variety. I'm like, if I can get big juicy strawberries with heaps of flavour that I know haven't been sprayed and I can get them really cheap, couldn't care less what they look like, what colour they are. So okay, so we don't even need to talk about why people should grow strawberries, do we?
No, everyone knows.
Exactly.
Everyone loves strawberries.
Exactly.
Have you ever met a person that doesn't love a strawberry?
Yeah, trying to think about it. No, I don't think so. Okay, so you're all sold. Let's just get into exactly how we're going to do it. So strawberries, despite being called a berry, they actually grow really differently to other berries. So we've done an episode on raspberries and we haven't done an episode on the rest of the berries like blackberries, loganberries, but they all grow on big bushy canes. So this is like a massive plant with the long wavy arms. Strawberries actually grow completely differently to the caneberries. These are delicate, tiny plants that only grow about 20 centimetres wide and 20 centimetres tall. They look like a little flower plant, a little viola bush.
I remember this from our episode when we were talking about growing raspberries because I suggested that a raspberry plant might look like a strawberry plant. And it doesn't. So it turns out that the strawberries are the odd ones out.
They are. Do you have a visual of what the strawberry plant looks like in your head?
I do have a visual of what a strawberry plant looks like because I have two in my garden. I got seedlings from the nursery. Planted them just like I do a regular plant, so I hope that is correct.
So you've cheated. You planted the strawberries before the strawberry episode. This is crazy.
This is when I get to find out if I've done everything right or wrong.
This is actually going to be a really interesting episode now because this is probably the first time you've actually done something before I've told you my plan. So let's see how many things you stuff up.
Okay, sure. This before we've done an episode on it, but you did give one of our friends, Claire, a tutorial on the strawberries, which I did hear, and so I'm hoping that I've done them right.
Oh my God, that's so funny. I totally forgot about that. Yeah, you're right. That was a year ago. Okay, excellent. And I mean, look, we have done that How to Plant a Plant episode, so you've obviously got that down pat, and you've heard me crap on about enriching your soil enough times, so I'm sure you did that right. Okay, let's keep going through. Now, the strawberry plants, these are perennial plants. So they're not annuals like our tomatoes and zucchinis. So this means that where we plant them, they're actually going to be in the same spot for years and years. We're not going to move them around every season. So it's important that you pick the spot you want them in, for good, effectively. But it's also another reason why I really like growing them, because once you've bought them, once you've got them in the garden, you're going to be reaping the rewards for years to come without any additional purchases or any additional planting. So there aren't too many of the really fun crops that have this perennial aspect. Artichokes is one, rhubarb is another, asparagus is another, but strawberries may be the favourite perennial out there. So when are we going to plant them? You are right, Tess. Now, spring. You actually can plant strawberries anytime. They're not the fussiest of plants, but the pick is absolutely spring, especially if you want to get a harvest this year. So get them in now. Where are we going to plant them? We can plant them in pots or in the ground. Tess, what did you opt for?
I went for pots.
Fabulous. Are they self-watering pots?
They are self-watering.
She's 3 for 3 currently.
Can I tell you just quickly about my issue with the self-watering pots, though?
Oh, hit me.
Because we're in lockdown, I had to do a click and collect. And the pots that I've got, I reckon, are probably going to be slightly too small. But I've just rolled with it for now. And if I have to repot them later, then c'est la vie.
Yeah. Look, send me some photos and we'll go from there. I think you'd be surprised at actually how small of a pot we can go with strawberries. But also because they're perennial, because they're going to be around for so many years, if we have to repot them, that's not a big deal at all. It's not like the tomato where you've got the hard and fast, really short season and you want to make the most of it. That's totally fine. Another, self-watering pots are my pick, so well done there. Another really good option is hanging baskets or any kind of like wall displays. They do really well in that hanging aspect, and we'll kind of go into the details of why that is a bit further down when we're looking at the maintenance. The only reason I caution people against hanging baskets or wall displays is that they are a bit of a prick to keep the moisture up, because they're usually, on a hot wall, in the sun, in a small pot. They're going to dry out really easily, and they don't have that, self-watering backup that your pot's got or that, planting in the ground has. So if you're committed to the watering or you've got a watering system, hanging baskets are great for strawberries. But if you're a bit fast and loose in the garden and you're not going to keep the moisture up, I would say tend towards putting them either in the ground or in the self-watering pot.
Earlier in the week, I posted on Instagram a picture of your contraption that's like a tower of strawberries.
Strawberry tower, yeah.
Is that self-watering, or is that more like a wall-hanging one that you need to keep up the water on?
It isn't self-watering. It's more like a wall-hanging one. But the reason why I that one works for me is because I have it hooked up to a dripper system. So it automatically waters every day. If I had to manually water that myself, I just can't imagine I could keep up with it. But it is a really, loved your post about it because it is that 3D gardening, and strawberries are such an easy one to embrace the 3D gardening because they're so small and because you can put them in really small pots. It's not like, imagine something like a pumpkin, how big of a pot you'd need if you were going to hang a pumpkin or something like that. Whereas like a strawberry, we can definitely get the 3D aspect happening. What is really essential with strawberries is they get full sun. You can have a beautiful strawberry plant not in full sun, but you won't get much, if any, fruit off it. So the positioning is super, super important. We need a hell of a lot of sun for lots of big, juicy strawberries. Now, if you've done this in pots, planted these in pots, that's really easy because you can just move them around the garden as you need if you realise the spot you put them in the first place isn't getting enough sun. If they're in the ground, obviously you've committed to that spot. So if we're planting it in the ground in a raised garden bed, make sure that that position gets lots of sun. And this again fits with the thing I say every episode when we're talking about fruiting things. They need the most sun in the garden. Save the shady spots for your roots and your leaves. So do you have yours in full sun at the moment, Tess?
They could be in a sunnier spot. I think I might move them.
Well, you've got that flexibility, don't you just? And the thing is, if you're getting heaps of fruit, they're getting enough sun. And if you're not getting heaps of fruit, sun could be the factor. It could also be water or something like that, but sun's a really good place to start for strawberries. And actually, in that strawberry tower that we talked about before, Tess, One of my problems with it is actually the lower level strawberries I don't seem to get as much fruit from, and I'm certain that's because the upper levels are shading it. So I'm playing around with a few ideas there, but yeah, no, sun is super important.
Now, on the self-watering pots, they are a little bit more expensive. Can you just give us a sales pitch again for why you opt for self-watering pots over regular pots? And why, perhaps, if it's more important with strawberries than with other things?
So the thing with the self-watering pots is the name is a bit deceptive. That makes it sound way more fancy than what it actually is. It's not really self-watering. Like, it's not like you don't have to water it. What it is it has the reservoir in the bottom of the pot that holds water. And what this means is when you water the plant, the water drips down into that reservoir. If there's more water, it'll flow out. It's usually got an escape, little hole in the side type thing. But then as the plant's beautifully watered or moist, then as it starts to dry out, what the plant actually does is wicks up the moisture that's sitting in the bottom of the pot and kind of sucks that back up into the soil. So this way the soil stays moist for possibly days, maybe a week, I don't know, it depends on how hot it is, depends on how big the pot is. We'll keep it moist for days longer than if it didn't have that reservoir. Because we don't want our roots sitting in water. We can't just flood our pots and think that that's going to keep them, watered longer. But, with a strawberry plant, if that means you only have to water it twice a week as opposed to watering it every day, it's going to save you a lot of time. And also in a really hot summer, like the smaller the pot you've got, the faster it's going to dry out. So in summer, you could water the pots in the morning, and if we have a scorching day, by the time you get home from work, that plant's already dried out. Simple as that. So by having that water in the bottom as the reservoir, it just gives the plant so much more kind of time, and it's just a bit of a buffer for you as a gardener. So, if time is really precious to you and you are away from home for extended periods, then I would say they are worth the bigger investment.
When I say that, it was more expensive than other ones, but it's really not. You can get some cheap ones.
I think when you look at the price of strawberries and you look at how cheap this whole thing is to set up, it is still very economical. But you're right, compared to just a standard kind of bowl pot, it is more expensive. So the reason with strawberries it's more important than possibly other things is often because we have strawberries in smaller pots. And as I said, the smaller pots dry out faster. And being a fruiting crop, they really can't handle drying out. So things like your cucumbers, your strawberries, your tomatoes, your pumpkins, you want a big juicy strawberry, you need it to be watered really well. Whereas something like a potato, it can dry out a bit, or even a green veggie, like a leafy veggie, can wilt down and then you give it a water and it kind of pipes back up. But with fruiting crops, it is more important to keep the moisture out. So I would say that's why we're going to prioritise a self-watering pot here and possibly not in other areas of the garden.
Okay, so we've covered off where it's going to go, how much sunlight we need. What are we talking about in terms of... Oh, sorry, I should start with just plant it like a regular plant. Is there anything else that we need to know there?
Well, see, I think you might have jumped the gun here because you and I know that we're planting a seedling. But the question may be asked, can we grow a seed? I would say...
Can we grow a seed?
Theoretically, you absolutely can. As a beginner, I definitely wouldn't. Strawberry plants are notoriously hard to grow from seed and they are notoriously cheap to buy from seedling. So buy a couple of seedlings, save yourself the effort. I started my strawberry adventure with 6 plants that I purchased, and I think they're about $3 each from a local nursery. So that cost me $18. I've now propagated them into over 100 strawberry plants.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it's really, really easy. I am not going to tell you how to do it today, but we are absolutely going to do another episode on this in the future because they're probably the easiest thing in the garden to propagate. But my point is, all my strawberry production now comes from $18 worth of plants. So if there's ever a time to just buy the seedlings, it's with the strawberries. And also, you say it's $3 for a little punnet of strawberry plant, not strawberries. That's going to give you strawberries for years and years to come. So it's a bit different than spending $3 on a zucchini plant. Frankly, I still think that's very cheap for the number of zucchinis you get. But that crop is only going to be in the garden for 6 months, whereas this is going to be in the garden for 4 or 5 years. So definitely invest in the seedlings. And the reason they're so cheap to buy is for the same reason that I mentioned before. They're so easy to propagate. They're easy for me to propagate. They're easy for the professionals to propagate, and you guys get the benefit of that in the cheap plants. So head to your nursery and buy the strawberry seedlings. There are, of course, different types, as I mentioned earlier. Some are sweeter, some are bigger, some are yellow, some are white, some fruit earlier, some fruit later, some fruit more consistently. As I said, I actually don't really care. I just want all the strawberries. So it's probably the one area where I'm not so fussed. But if you want the variety out there, like there are heaps and heaps of options, even in punnets, seedling punnets in nurseries. Do you know what you bought, Tess?
No idea. I think there was limited supply and I just bought whatever one was on the top of the list.
I mean, in lockdown, that would be about the case. Also, often I see the really cheap punnets of seedlings are just identified as strawberries, doesn't even tell you what variety they are. But those punnets I've seen as cheap as $2. And as I said, I don't really care. Buy them, go for it. They're all great. It's a strawberry. So you're going to get about 1/2 kilo of strawberries per plant per year.
Gosh, that's good.
It's 2 punnets worth, which is good given how tiny the plant is, but also isn't probably enough strawberries to get you through the year. So you're definitely going to want a few plants.
Mm-hmm.
How many did you buy? You bought 2.
I bought 2.
Okay, well, you're getting 1 kilo of strawberries.
Might need to buy more.
I reckon. Or when it comes to autumn, we can just talk about propagating them and you can get them for free.
Can't wait.
So the next thing, so you've got your plants, not your seeds. You're going to plant a plant. Season 1, episode 1 of this podcast. Key here is I would plant into fresh potting mix because we've only got a little pot or a little space we're going to put them in, and we want our strawberries, we want heaps of them, so we want heaps of nutrients in that soil. So I'd invest in, a fresh bag of potting mix. Don't dig your crappy stuff out of a garden bed and put that in the pod. And again, you're probably paying $10 for 25 litres of potting mix here, and that's going to get you a lot of strawberry pots. So we're still keeping this on the cheap end of the gardening adventure. Dare I ask what you potted them up in?
In fresh potting mix.
Oh, fabulous. Look at that. Okay. Excellent.
I had to buy some fresh potting mix for my strawberries and also my potato sack.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Go with the fresh potting mix, and then in a couple of years you can add a bit of, liquid fertilizer or pelletized fertilizer or something like that. But at the moment, fresh potting mix is going to do those strawberries beautifully.
So that was going to be one of my questions. We may as well cover it off now that you bring it up. So just in terms of that ongoing soil maintenance, because you obviously don't have any worms in your pot.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a worm farm, can you just use the worm tea as well?
Oh my, that would just be heaven to those strawberry plants. Absolutely use the worm tea.
How often in the season are we replenishing the soil for pots?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, if you've got fresh potting mix, you've got a bit of time to play with. But at the same time, if you gave them a drink every second week this is in the growing season, so spring and summer and autumn possibly. If you every 2 weeks gave them some liquid fertilizer, so like a seaweed solution mixed up in your watering can, or the worm tea, you are going to absolutely get the biggest bumper harvest of strawberries.
Okay.
That's the gold standard though. I mean, do I do that? No way. If they got a feed, especially with 100 strawberries, geez, if they got a feed every once a season, so 3 times a year, I'd be quite chuffed with that. So
right, okay.
Not
essential.
But if you are going for the most strawberries humanly possible, then yeah, give them a feed. But in the first year, that's going to be less important because that potting mix is so fresh and full of nutrients. As the years go on, if we're talking year 4 and you haven't fed that soil at all, because as you say, there's no worms in that pot, you are absolutely going to see a decrease in your strawberry production. So then I would say it becomes more and more important.
Fantastic.
So we need to space our strawberries, and that would be about 15 to 30 centimetres apart. So quite close together, really, for a perennial crop. Would that be what we're looking at for your plants?
I reckon the diameter is probably about 20 centimetres.
Oh,
so maybe perfect. I'm okay.
I think that sounds perfect. I mean,
I'll send you a picture anyway.
Yeah, that would kind of make it 10 centimetres either way, which is kind of closer. But as you say, if you need to repot them in the future, go for gold. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We've already touched on watering, but I'm going to go there again. We have to keep the watering up. We want fat, juicy strawberries. They need water. The thing with the strawberries, though, which is unlike some other crops, is they're really susceptible to funguses on their leaves and on their fruit. So the way we actually reduce our chances of that becoming an issue is we don't want to water the fruit or the foliage. We want to only water the soil. Tess is like, I don't know how that's going to play out.
I don't know how it's going to play out at all.
So the way that most people get around this, and this, when I say most people, I'm talking like the professionals here or like the serious gardeners, is you use a dripper system. So a dripper simply just drops water onto the soil and then the water soaks into the soil and there's no water needed on the foliage. So, if you can set up a dripper system, bloody brilliant. But if that's not functional to you, I'm trying to imagine how you do this with a hose without getting the foliage wet. I suppose you give it a red hot crack.
Do you know what you could do?
Tell me.
Could use, the watering cans that have just like a small, or even a jug, and just pour in around the leaves.
Like take your, the thing with the lots of holes on the watering can, like the end bit, you can just pull
take that bit off.
Yeah, and just pour it on the side. Yeah, that makes sense. Do that.
Try that. Let us know how it goes.
Give that a crack.
What does the fungi look like?
It usually kind of looks a bit moldy.
Okay. What do we do if we see it?
Yeah, good luck. If you see it, stop watering it and try and dry it out a bit. And the other thing is airflow. So if you've got your strawberries in somewhere that doesn't get a lot of airflow in the garden, that can make it more susceptible. Maybe that's why hanging baskets and stuff kind of work well because they've got a lot of airflow around them. So just think about that. Maybe move it to a different position. I'm not sure, honestly, if there are fungicides you can use.
Should you chop off the leaves that are have a bit of fungi on them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, get rid of the fungi leaves and the fungi fruit, definitely. Mm-hmm. If you're a watering system obsessor like me, or you want to really make this gardening efficient, you can get little, they look like little pencils and you stick them in pots and they all hook up to the tap. So it's like these little tiny black cords attached to pencils and then you shove them in the pot and then that kind of drips into each pot and then your strawberries are never going to get watered and the timer on the tap is going to do it for you. So that's what I actually use to water my strawberries. But obviously if you've got one pot, you're not going to set that up. But something to think about, people. The other thing we can do to help with the fungus and also keep the strawberries kind of dry is mulching them. So this is where we get some straw and we just kind of pad that out around the plant. If they're in a pot, this is a bit difficult because there's not a lot of space around the plant in the pot. But give it a bit of a crack. And if they're in a garden bed, this is really essential. So we don't want our little strawberries as they're growing sitting on the wet soil. We want them sitting on the nice dry bed of straw. So this also helps prevent moisture loss in the garden. So when I'm talking about those strawberries drying out, the mulch will hold the moisture in. If you've got a hanging basket or a small pot, it's kind of less essential because what the strawberries will actually do is grow out the side of the pot and then hang down the side. So they're kind of suspended in thin air, not sitting on soil, and therefore they're not going to stay wet and they're not going to have that possibility of rotting, and the airflow is really good for the fungus. So actually, now that I talk about it...
You've sold yourself on the hanging pots, haven't you?
I really have. Between the hanging pots and a small self-watering pot, I mean, this is gold. So yeah, it's about the airflow. So mulching, if you can get some around, if the pot or the plant is so big that you can't get the mulch around, then probably the strawberries aren't sitting on soil, so you're doing fine. Mm-hmm. So that's really the only maintenance thing, is just water the crap out of it, keep the strawberries dry, and harvest them when they're red and juicy and delicious.
On harvesting, I assume that you can just start chopping them off whenever you like, but can they get too big?
They are the ultimate cut and come again in the fruit department, which is quite nice. Okay. You'll get, one will be ready and you cut it off and you eat that one, and then a couple of days another one will be ready, and this kind of continues throughout all the warmer months. You can leave them on there too long, and then they turn the same way that they turned when you buy a punnet in the supermarket and they've been there too long and they go a bit like
Bit mush,
bit fermented smelling, that kind of thing. It'll do that on the plant if you leave it.
Okay.
I reckon the reason purchased strawberries don't taste as good, one of the many reasons, is they're often picked prior to being ripe. And you know when you can see they've got like a big white neck on them? Mm-hmm. They're not ripe, and strawberries won't ripen once they've been picked. Some things like avocados will absolutely ripen off the bush. A strawberry will not. So the trick to get the best flavour is to leave them on the plant until there's no white left to be seen. That's when you know they're ready.
Great. And speaking of how delicious strawberries are, do other things like birds and possums find them as delicious as we do?
Yes, you are correct. The birds may be a concern. It'll be one of those things that you'll grow them, and if you're finding they're disappearing, you know you've got a bird problem. If they're not, I mean, great. Like I think that every berry is the most attractive thing ever to a bird, but then in practice, I often grow them outside, you know, my enclosed area, and I find that most of them survive. So, you know, maybe it's less of a problem than I made it out to be in the raspberries episode, but you'll just have to see. But the good thing is, because they're so small, if you did cover them in a net, I mean, it's so easy to do it, right? It's like just wrapping it in a bag, really. The thing that you are going to have a problem with, well, is a bigger problem than birds, is slugs and snails. Slugs and snails love the strawberries. I really am selling the hanging baskets here, but one of the best ways to help with the slugs and snails is the hanging baskets, because they're so far off the ground that I don't know if like literally the slugs and snails can't get to them, or it's like that's just too much work when there's other low-hanging fruit, excuse the pun. I'm not sure what it is, but I definitely find my strawberries off the ground are way less prone to any damage from the slugs and snails. Also, even just in a pot, having them kind of hanging off the side of the pot suspended in the air seems to also keep the slugs and snails off the strawberries, because, I mean, they'd really have to go out on the skinny branches to get to them. I find if the strawberries are sitting on the straw, or worse, sitting on the soil, they are definitely going to be susceptible to the slugs and snails. So get the fruit off the soil, and if you're still having a slug and snail issue, head to the slugs and snails episode and all the things we talked about in that episode about how to control slugs and snails.
Yeah, bunch of solutions for you.
Yeah, exactly. And they're all going to be just as relevant here. So I'd say they're going to be, if there's one problem with, two possible problems with strawberries, it's going to be fungus, so dry it out, and slugs and snails, which actually both problems are kind of solved with the same solution. I'm going to take some photos of my hanging baskets this weekend.
So the big question, is the juice worth the squeeze? This is where we look at the effort-reward ratio of today's topic. The categories are superstar, high effort, high reward. Completing this will make you feel like an absolute rock star. Best on ground, low effort, high reward. Quick wins and fill-ins, low effort, low reward. And finally, the wooden spoon, high effort, but not much reward.
Tessie, you've planted the strawberries. Are you still feeling positive in your decision? Is the juice worth the squeeze here?
The juice is worth the squeeze, and I'll tell you why. On the squeezy juice matrix, it's an effort-reward ratio. Reward is through the roof. A strawberry is delicious. So, all of the additional effort that we've got here of keeping the fungi, watching out for that, keeping the slugs and snails at bay, keeping the water up, they are all effort that I'm very, very happy to put in for my strawberry harvest.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that is some serious reward there. My negative that I was thinking was that given the plants are quite small, you're not getting a huge amount of harvest per plant. But then actually in so many ways that's a positive as well, because no matter what size garden you've got, from the tiniest balcony to the biggest hobby farm, you can just have as many or as little strawberry plants as work for you, work for your space, work for the amount of effort you're going to put in. So it really is like the one crop that kind of works for everyone.
And growing in pots is just so versatile.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, as I say, every time it is a bit more work just because of that watering issue. But, as I said, it seems to work quite well with the old strawberries.
My one caveat will be, let's talk at the end of the season about how I've gone with all of the various pests.
I will also say you've planted them this spring. I would definitely expect you to get some strawberries this year, but I'm expecting you to get maybe a sixth of what you'll get next year.
Oh.
So other point to consider is you've got to be in it for the long game. This is not like fruit tree long game where it's like, or avocado tree long game where it's like 8 years or something, but it won't be your best harvest this year. But next year I would expect there's going to be pavlovas and strawberry feasts happening at Tessa's house.
Amazing.
All day, every day. Exactly.
So best on ground for me.
Oh, one more thing that gives it best on ground is, here we go. When we talk about the cut and come again versus the produce that kind of all ripens at the same time, there's so many fruits that deliver all at the same time. And for that week or month, you are happy as a pig in shit. For the rest of the year, there's nothing going on. Strawberries will, and again, depending on the variety, but for the most part, will give you a bountiful crop from kind of mid to late spring right through to the end of autumn. So that is a seriously long season.
Absolute pro.
Yeah. No, I'm sold. Best on ground.
Rooting for You is hosted by Alyce and Tess, artwork by Lauren Janine. You can find us on Instagram at rootingforyoupod or email rootingforyou@alycealexandra.com. And remember, we are rooting for you.